Now, obviously, this is going to be a talk centered around doing diversity, which is the title, but very much tailored to you as media folks already. I have been really working with Meek School of Education, really paying close attention to the work you do here. And you starting very early in this program doing media in all forms. It's amazing to me. But that also means that you are very well placed to be thinking about your role in doing diversity and what that means. So, and then when you have anyone in the media spectrum offering this kind of analysis, what are they bringing to the conversation? What are they leaving out? What point of view is it coming from, and what point of view is it completely destroying? Those are the questions, right? And in those, in setting that framework, my talk will direct you to some institutional, individual accountability frameworks that can maybe help that person who make that statement think about it differently and actually be helpful in furthering conversations, whatever that conversation is, rather than make snap judgment, right? Obviously, Kendrick Lamar felt strongly enough about it to write a song from an artistic point of view because he and the art form were under attack. So we already know that that snap judgment led to an actual particular reaction. Think about the millions of reactions that everyday snap judgments cause. All right, so what, during diversity, institutional and individual, what is it that we're talking about? When I talk about accountability, I talk about, and I'm gonna put the clock back on now that we're done with the media, because I gotta work with a clock. I can talk forever. So accountability means responsibility, right? That's a generic, like taking responsibility, taking ownership. But what I'm using it for here is the idea that you have to be deliberate. When you deliberate, you think about what you're doing, you measure where you want to go, and you act accordingly. So furthermore, I have 3 steps that I think that everything we're going to talk about can fall under in terms of doing diversity, meaning doing it differently than we've been doing. So I'm starting with a thesis. We're not doing it well at all, okay? Like I say in my class, spoiler alert, we suck at this. So how can we do better? We can be deliberate in language, deliberate in action, and being deliberate as a noun here. Deliberateness is language, right? Deliberateness in action and in actively educating oneself and each other about others, right? So that's getting us closer to doing diversity. And deliberateness and ownership of intention. You can have the first 2, but if you don't know why you're doing it and what you intended to, if you don't ask yourself that, then you will fail as well. So think about that model. I think that is 3 pillars that don't get us to nirvana. The world is not gonna all of a sudden become milk and honey as they've promised us when we were 0 years old. Liars. But it will get better. It can get better if we do this. And our communities can get better. So I have, again, because I'm in media, and I know, my graphics suck because I basically took it. So this is, I know you guys are all hip to this. This is the Pepsi controversy from last week. And if we go back to the model, what I want you to think about is what would deliberateness in language, in action, and education about others, right? And deliberateness and ownership of intention. What would these 3 things have given result to from this to this? Would we have had a better product for these individuals at the boardroom, in the media setting, in the ad setting, all of the advisors, every step that it took to approve this commercial, knowing that it was modeled after this? So if you guys, just for everybody to be on the same board, you know that this is a picture of a protester in Ferguson, and she is literally standing her ground and risking her life to make a statement that, yes, I'm here, hear me, before she gets arrested. She eventually gets arrested. So this is the setting. And the intention of the company in making this version, this commercial, was to promote unity. So they started with the third step, right? We can't, obviously they're in the business of making money, but you can make money and promote unity at the same time. Come on, guys, stop being blasé and jaded. But no, you can't do both. There are companies doing both. And they could have moved the needle just a bit. How many wonderful commercials have we cried over during the Super Bowls? You can do it. But it takes more than intention. And so they were missing a number of other steps, including accountability. No one asked themselves, what are we doing? What assumptions are we making? Whose stories are we interested in telling, even if we are borrowing from somebody else? Whose stories are we prioritizing here? This is no longer about Ferguson or protest, even though the company is using the context of protest. This is becoming another story. So you have an erasure completely happening with this marketing campaign, though their intention was something else. So we need, so the reason I'm using this is not to beat a dead horse, which social media has done that quite well. But it is for you to think about you in that boardroom, you in that media setting, you as the photographer, the writer, the interpreter of culture to the folks who are paying the big bucks. What stories are you putting forward? What choices are you making? How are you being deliberate in balancing the goal of your job, but at the same time holding your institution accountable and holding yourself accountable to what you think your role in society should be? So this asks us, right, this latest kerfuffle around media usage asks us to talk about what elements go into decision making. How many chances do we have to impact outcome and make it more inclusive every day? And we fail to because of knee-jerk reaction or habit. That's really what inherent in this discussion, right? Because you could easily tell me, and I want you to tell me, well, Pastor Alexandre, come on. Did y'all see that Saturday Night Live sketch? In order to talk to you, I have to consume these things. So, right, the week after this came out, Saturday Night Live had a sketch where the person who actually was in the boardroom is calling everybody, telling them his idea. And they all like, no, you don't want to do that. And he ignores all of them, right? It's hilarious, it's funny, and then it blows in his face. And this is the idea, right? What goes into decision making? Who do you listen to? Who do you value? Whose stories do you think are more important? And in doing that, in not understanding who you're valuing and whose stories you're putting first, you are losing on multiple chances to impact outcome in a positive, long, permanent way, right? Which gets us back to being hamsters doing the same thing over and over again. Every week we're shocked and appalled that gambling is going on in this establishment. Just because we're doing the same thing, how can we not have the same result? So contrast that to when we actually know and care about people, when we're close to someone. So on the one hand, you're in the boardroom, you're making these decisions, you're thinking, I'm tired, really, does it really matter? I know, it's like you getting ready for your papers. Similar situation, cost-benefit analysis. And I'm telling you, yes, I understand that reality, but there are still opportunities within that pocket if you train yourself or try to train yourself. I'm still training myself. You will always continue the training, but being deliberate is a form of training. And we can learn that this training is possible. We can realize, we can lay our eyes on it, know that this training is possible, and that we know how to do better because we treat the people we love better. How? Because when we, for example, say something and we might notice that someone close to us get hurt, we might ask yourself, I didn't know this about this person. Maybe I should have said it differently. How many times have y'all said this after a conversation? Yes, right? You feel bad? Yeah. Is it someone like a friend or someone you care about? Yeah. It's automatic because we're not animals, and animals do this. My dog comes to me all the time, so they get a bad rap anyway. So I don't know what we would have be robots. We got feelings. Everybody, we sentient beings, and not only that, we value community. We want to be part of something valuable. Therefore, when we value the community of which we are part of, anybody that we feel that we off, right? We say something or contribute something that causes an imbalance in energy, that will bother us. Doesn't mean that our ego might not get in the way, but you can pinpoint that moment. You can. And that's that moment that I want you to think about as a potential, because that's that moment that leads to better doing and deliberation in the future. We are more deliberate when we know each other and care about them. We do that, we become deliberate because we learn from these interactions, and then we try not to do it again. That's why we have lasting friendships. That's why we have lasting relationship. That's why mothers and daughters eventually get along in their 30s and 40s and 60s and 70s. Might not have get along earlier, right? You see what I'm talking? I mean, am I right? Right. I mean, you have relationships that bear fruits. If we did not have relationships that bore fruit, we would be very lonely individuals. So there are normal reactions when we realize we've hurt or we might hurt people close to us. Those are things that our human species have learned over millennia. Yet we have a hard time activating the same empathy and concern for those we view as inherently different and other. Why is that? Defense mechanism, views of scarce resources, false sense of protection, sink or swim. So if we stay on this slide for a second, what do I mean by defense mechanism? Why would we have a harder time? We do it with our close loved ones too, but with our people that we feel are totally disconnected from us, that we can't understand, are so different than us, we do it even more pointedly. What do I mean? What kind of form that defense mechanism might take? Guys, can you give me an example? Yeah?
Like the strongest survive, like survival of the fittest.
Yeah, survival of the fittest. So give me something where you think that that reaction might come in, yeah?
I guess like one of my defense mechanisms would be not getting close to certain people or not like having an emotional attachment.
Yeah. Because, you can't love everybody, right? You can't love everybody. Have y'all ever heard that? All right, I'm going to give you a quick example. You go to San Francisco, great city, love it. You're walking downtown in some pockets, and there's slews of homeless people. It's shocking to you because you think of San Francisco as like, Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And it is that. It is both, right? And then someone comes to you and asks you for $1 because, right, they're in need. There's a few ways you can react to this, and this is not a statement of you at that moment. But one way to prevent yourself from being overwhelmed by that situation might be, listen, I got problems too, right? I got problems too. We all got problems. And, look at this person not working, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? So it's not just that you are judging the person, but also you're protecting yourself. You think that it is necessary. It is us and them. It is necessary. There's a competition out there, and you can't have both of y'all winning. Does that make sense? Second, the views of scarce resources relate to this. What do I mean by scarce resources? So if your defense mechanism would be us and them, what do I mean by scarce resources? Scarcity means, huh? There's a lack of it. Thank you. There's little of it. That means, so there's 7 billion people. It was 6 billion once, so that means I'm old. 7 billion people on this planet, right? And it's going to be more by the time you get my age. What does that mean if we think there's a lack of resources? Yeah?
That everyone can't get the same resources, like, because there's not enough.
Yeah, there's not enough for everybody. So some people got to be at the bottom. And y'all not going to let him show you out like that, are y'all? Okay, I'm just saying he's kind of winning. Okay, I'm not dividing nobody. Just facts, facts on facts on facts. But yes, yeah. So that's definitely a narrative, right? Does that sound familiar? Do we think that there might be little, and then, maybe some might have it, and then maybe some deserve it, right? So there's a lot that comes with the defense mechanism and the view of scarce resources. There's the, I'm protecting myself. There's only so little in this world, right? And then there's this other idea, meritocracy. Some people might deserve it more than others, right? And then you can add so much. Think about everything that justify how easy we might dismiss others, right? And you might fit it under these 2 steps this is how we make sense of it, or else it might cripple us or it might paralyze us. I'm always stopping to use different words. And that's because even though I told you we all works in progress, and even though this is what I do, language itself shows me how this idea of scarce resources and defense mechanism shows itself everywhere. If I choose to use cripple, then I'm conveying a negative connotation. But to use the verb cripple is ingrained in our psyche, right? So it'll come automatically. And that doesn't mean that that's not an opportunity for awareness. It is what you do with what you've been taught. That's the difference. So if I know that I don't want to convey a hierarchical structure, then I'm going to keep looking. I'm going to keep looking for the better framework, right? And that is what I am arguing here with deliberateness. That's what I'm encouraging all of us to do with deliberateness. Because if we think about it, some people got to win, some people are higher, depending on whatever rationale you've heard or we've been taught, then we then end up in that cycle. The third relates to these other 2, sink or swim, right? So this idea that we're protecting ourselves relates to the idea of we defending this throne, right? It's either us or them. If we don't take tough measures, they might eat us up. They might run on all of us. Are there examples that you hear about that every day? Does that sound remotely familiar? People in the back. People in the back. Oh, yeah, I'm going to keep on it. People in the back, can you wave over here? Yes, thank you. 2 o'clock, I know. I just need a modicum sign of life. All right. But does this attitude really match reality? The self-preservationist attitude holds us back. It hurts us. It's actually killing us. So if we were right that those 3 things, right, is the way to go, then we would find ourselves to be in a much better place where the earth is thriving, we're thriving, we're not doing the same thing over and over again. But in fact, it's actually ended up being the opposite. So I have 2 examples to show how this attitude is really not doing well for us. We are regressing as a society. One example is the suicide rate is highest than it's ever been in 30 years. The suicide rate is higher than it's been in 30 years. And this is a New York Times articles, and this has been documented by leading researchers, Pew Research, et cetera, basically tracking every single demographic. Every single demographic is experiencing such isolation, such despondency and hurt that suicide is turning to be the only answer. Now, there are some palpable figures that should tell you what that means. It's not just that the suicide rate is higher than it's ever been. It's about how many people are killing themselves every day. 20, we just corrected it, and we think that's, even the people who corrected it said, let's not think we're winning. It's not 22, it's 20. 20 veterans killing themselves every day. General population, so it's compared to the general population, it's out of the box. But think about 20 veterans killing themselves every day. 20. And then think about thousands of people killing themselves in the general population daily. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. Thousands of people killing themselves daily. So the only group that has not been impacted by the high rate of suicide are people 75 and over. That should give you an idea. So everyone, men, women, youth, the rate of suicide for people of color is even higher. Young people of color, so all the myths that we have about some cultures not being impacted. The other statistical reality is that most Americans are so isolated that they do not have racial difference or people in different different background in close, intimate spaces. So this is the graph that shows the average American and what they might have, and the average Black American and what they might have, and the fact that that is a rarity, and you have a gulf of individuals, 64%, who just don't have that in their space. So when we go back to the idea, how do we automatically have these reactions of empathy and wanting to do better when we hurt someone close to us, versus when we don't know the person, right? And we don't feel anything and we become self-protectionists. We now, even at least just on the racial element, in the racial context, we see what the impact of the natural reaction versus for people who are close to us versus the reaction of detachment and self-protection for people we don't know, how that might impact our understanding and our level of connection and lack of in the racial context. How can we ever move as a society when we don't learn to each other in intimate spaces? And it's a vicious cycle, right? It is because we are self-protectionists that we don't learn about each other in intimate spaces. We don't want to take those chances. And that then leads to us not having these kind of connections. So this is, many spheres have reported this. This is another research that came out a few years ago. But if you're interested, Washington Post and other outlets, Reuters, et cetera, have also published them. So it's nice to say be deliberate in action, of intention, right, and language. Those are all good. But what else? What are some more practical ways you could implement this every day? One is to ask yourself for every statement, and this is the example I gave you with using different words, right? And some words might never be satisfying. Then you might want to create new words. Y'all do it every day, right? Sweden created a whole new pronoun because of their commitment to gender neutrality. Just There are no rules when you're trying to make a community that's everlasting, right? As long as you agree on those goals together, right? So what assumptions am I conveying with this sentence or word is the first, right? Because language is our primary tool of communication. Oftentimes we hurt people through communicating, right? So we can, every day before we speak, just take a pause, which is your slogan, right? Take a pause and ask yourself, what am I conveying? And one is replace whatever goal, right? For me, one really big goal is gender neutrality, gender bias-free society. Obviously, I care about all of the other biases, right? But my work has focused a lot on gender bias-free society. So I spend a lot of time wrestling with how I can do this every day in my own, right? Even in my curse words, somebody came up with MF, what is it? MF, I'm from Brooklyn. MF is a terrible word. It's terrible, never use it. I grew up using it. And, I can eliminate it from my language, which is one, right? And because you should never try to cure one illness with another illness. But I heard kids recently said, I'm so addicted to these words, and young people, not kids. I'm so addicted to this word, I've substituted the word FF, right? Fathers instead of mothers. Now, it doesn't get us all the way there. I don't recommend it. But what I noticed, why I like to pay attention with what y'all talking about, is that you are engaging with the difficulty of what we've inherited and why. The first step, you saying, I'm not going to use mother all the time. Let me substitute. That first step is evident to me of you knowing what assumptions that you're conveying to the word and trying to progress. And the next step will be, how do I eliminate all of it, right? By not imposing any burden on any group. So that's why really fleshing out. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they want to see your veins and they give you iodine or whatever the word is, right? You need clarity. In order to need clarity, you have to keep. Deliberateness is about asking yourself, right? That's why this is accountability. And then you ask yourself, well, if I use this all the time and I stand for this, right, in my core, not to other people, not just to the external world. I'm not talking about what you're representing to the external world. The two could be the same, and I would love that. But I know human beings are complicated. But what I think is primordial is what you represent to yourself. If you're not at peace to yourself, with yourself, there's no existing in this world. You're always going to be in fragments. So the first step is, am I being consistent with the world that I want to create? And that first question goes along then with the second question. And 3, education. Do I know all I need to know? Where can I find objective and constructive information to educate myself? Because you're not going to always be able, sometimes you need time. I call it mildewing, Sometimes I need to process. I know there's something I'm uncomfortable with, maybe in my usage of that language and, love and hate, right? If you grew up with hip-hop and love hip-hop, that same, existence in your genre of art, whatever that you love, you should be able to critically analyze it in a way that ultimately ends up into engagement with what's good about the society that you love, what's good about the genre that you love, what's good about the profession that you love, and what could be done differently and make it better. And I, like everybody else, have to do this. But sometimes it's easier after you've matured, not just because, right, it happens automatically with age, but because you learn more as you age, right? So then that tells you that a prerequisite for a successful deliberation process is education, knowing more, and not putting the onus on the people who are telling you something is wrong to do the educating for you, right? Because this is all an internal, individual journey of accountability. And how do you translate this in your everyday life, in your daily decisions and interaction becomes the ultimate practice. So how do you make sure if you hear that Professor Alexandre put these three up and you're like, yeah. But if you do care about it, right, and you think, hey, questioning myself might be a good idea. I might want to do this more systematically. How can I help this become a better practice? Those questions, of course, I think are always key, right, in the process of educating yourself. And you've heard this in classes, so this is not new, is very important. But I also think changing your perspective. Understanding that if you start with the assumption, unlike the self-protection paradigm that we've inherited that I started with and that I've said is not working, what about a different way of looking at it? That this is not about the other, but it's about us, right? So it is the idea of vulnerability as universal. That for everything that might make someone other, there's a piece of them in us. And we're just not seeing it. We just haven't done the work. We have not done the three-step deliberation in action and tension. And we have not educated ourselves to really understand so that we can change our approach. We just haven't. And when we do, we understand that empathy is what's enabled us to survive, right? Whenever we have lacked empathy in our society, anthropologists, right, do a better job than I could giving you specific incidents of this. But over our human history, our extension have come out of isolation and of tribalism. And so connection is important because tribalism is the idea of relating to someone, right? People who common connectors. So actually being together is essential to our survival, but that very thing, when we start excluding other people, is what causes extension of whoever those two groups that go into conflict, right? So then empathy has always been our gluing agent in the first place. That's how we create villages. You know, Aristotle says we start with the family, right? And in our realities, mother, father, mother, child, right? We kind of like to have pets, mother, pets, or whatever you think as your village, right? Your own family, in your house. We start with that, but then we create the village. Aristotle didn't think about all the way we're creating villages, but that's what we do now, right? We create a village. Then we go on and we negotiate with each other to create a community, and then we create a society and government. That's how it's always been. Anthropologists, even before Aristotle had that, structure, that's what we're doing. That's what allowed us survival. But we were only able to do it because we understood our connection, the way we complemented each other, the way we needed each other. And then we were in smaller spaces, of course, and that was easier. And then it always risked disintegration when we started othering. So without it, we go to war and we kill. So question is always, do you want us to thrive together, or would you rather live in a false reality of us against them? What world do you prefer to work in as future professionals? What world do you want to have children in? I think that goes into changing your perspective. If you change your perspective and understand, even if you start with the angle, what world do you want? And we're not quite at the place of vulnerability as universal. That's the process, right? But you know the hard fact, like I would rather be happy and not be in threat of war, for example, right? I'm all for that. Even if you start there, your perspective will already change because you will work toward seeing more commonality, understanding, educating yourself. That's the tool that ties all of this together. And then eventually, maybe by the time we're 70 or 80, I pray, we start understanding, it starts being natural to us to do empathy, to see each other in the other. But I'm not even putting that tall order in front of you now. I don't think that's, I think we're all humans. We do it the best we can. But changing your perspective you can do from now. You can understand that we become at risk when we buy into the other and tribalism. So see everyone as a part of you with common goals, universal struggles, etc. So there's strong benefits that have been gained when we do this. For example, the marriage equality movement sped up. It's actually one of the quickest gains, relatively speaking. It's not quick for the people who were isolated for centuries, but it's quick legally because A, there was really great models in the civil rights movement, and B, we had tools for people to connect with each other. So our communications and our ability to relate to each other. And when researchers went somewhere during, when the cases were making their way to the courts, when the researchers started polling folks, the determining factor that they pointed out for the relative success of the marriage equality movement was when people started knowing folks of different sexual orientation. That was the main determinator that changed people's perspective. And in a matter of 20 years, we went from the majority of Americans being against marriage equality to the overwhelming majority of Americans being for it. So we know how to do this. We've done this before. Other times when it's been done was 50 years ago during the civil rights movement, when whites, blacks, and all colors started marching together. And they started seeing each other in the face of the other. We know how to do it, but we often forget. So it usually involves all of the steps that I talk about, but it also starts with changing your perspective and understanding that our survival depends on it. So a mandate of individual and institutional accountability at all times of ourselves, of each other. That's deliberateness, and that means that if we're doing it individually, then we ask the same of our institution. We ask the same of the media company, we ask the same of the publishers, etc. So I'm going to end there, and I want to test this with things that you think you might have gone through or might observe that makes you routine on the job and in life examples. Anybody? Have y'all faced some of this as students? Yeah, go ahead.
You talked about earlier with us being wiser and I guess with age. I don't know if that's always the case. Because I feel like when you I guess especially like going to college and then your young adult life, I think that sometimes that people get so caught up in these social constructs that people have created that people actually become less understanding. And
tell me a little bit about what have you observed? What do you think? Like so age is not the key determinant, right?
Well, yeah. For me, I grew up somewhere in Texas, not from here, and I feel like I remember being in classes in elementary school, high school with people of all different races, whatnot, and then I feel like as people get older, I feel like that there's more division and it is more divided in high school and then college. For example, I'm not trying to, I guess, accuse anybody of anything about.
Oh, don't worry. We all, like people who are in the room are as old as I am, so we won't take it personally.
Like with Greek societies on campus, for example. Really, there are a lot of different places where it's not as inclusive as I feel like that you would maybe act if you were 9 or 10 and like the classroom was playing with each other at recess.
Okay, so you're really just placing this in your age group right now, right? So Greek society, you feel like it's less free and less open than what you experienced when you were younger. Why do you think that is? What is it that's at play?
Just, I guess that's kind of the question. It's like why are people, I guess when they get to be this age, less inclusive? I don't really know.
Do you think people who are less open know all they can know about that would make them more open?
No, and I think that's the problem. I think that you know, you have a couple people think one way, I guess more people gravitate towards
Right.
a less inclusive, more protection.
Right. So there's an element of self-protection in there. Now, let's trace back to when you were in the young stage, right? What was going on there? Were you worried about self-protection?
No.
Right? So 7 and under, you weren't worried about any of that, right? So that captures basically what we talk about, that humans crave commonality, that, you know, you see the babies and they want babies like them, etc. Versus when we start getting these messages, right? So people your age and older, like I said, age is not a prerequisite, right? It's the deliberate education. Now, the question is, when you are in these spaces, how can you be part of the change by sharing information and encouraging the kind of education that might make it more open?
I mean, I think it's, you know, within the social construct, you might have to have a level of bravery saying, you know, guys, you know, this isn't right. You know, I don't know.
Why is it why does it require bravery?
To like break out of that protectionist.
Right, why bravery? That's an interesting word.
Just because, you know, you might get a lot of criticism, like, oh, why are you being nice to
Right, right.
this person? You know, they're not like us, you know.
Right. So do you see why I said an element of this requires coming to terms with what you want from this world? This is an internal process. Yeah, you're right. It is very hard to go against what seems to be the grain. But if you've made up your mind about what kind of world you want, it's not going to be easy, right? But think about it. Being in college is probably the lowest stake that you have, right? So if you don't, one way to practice for later on in life might be to practice while you're in college. Does that make sense? So I encourage you to do these steps. Young man?
Oh, I was going to agree with some of the, or kind of add to what he was saying. There is a large concentration of stigma behind thinking, oh yeah, I'm great, I'm independent, I'm different.
Ha.
But really, there's a lot of people who are scared to step out of their bounds. I see a lot of this with fraternities, sororities, a lot of people who are in a lot of different social groups because they're afraid. They say they're not, but they are deeper down afraid to step out of that bound.
Mm-hmm.
And that it would be, it is very important in diversity to not only think of it as a concept for everybody, but as also of yourself.
Yes.
To move on as an individual and not as a group.
Absolutely. It's an internal process. We can't do diversity without doing it internally. And really, doing diversity could just be translated into being the best person you can be. Just trying to do that without even thinking of the buzzwords or the fancy word of diversity will be just good enough.
Pushing independence among yourself is another good campaign idea alongside of this.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else before we break? Thank you, guys. You've been a great group. See you later.